Our topic tonight is both important and timely, the real costs of building affordable housing in Montgomery County. And to talk about some of the issues involved, we have two expert panelists. First, we have James Hedrick, who is an ACT board member with long experience in financial issues associated with developing affordable housing. James is chair of the Rockville Housing Enterprises, and among other things, that organization owns and operates over 100 public housing units, administers more than 400 vouchers in its Housing Choice Voucher program. It owns and operates more than 50 units of low-income housing tax credit properties, and it owns more than 200 units in the Fireside complex, of which more than 100 units are affordable. Our other guest is Maryland Delegate Vaughn Stewart from District 19, a district that includes Kent Mill, Aspen Hill, Glenmont, and Durwood, among other neighborhoods. Vaughn is a board member of Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Delegate Stewart is a longtime advocate for affordable housing. He's the author of 3 bills that would significantly change housing policy in the state of Maryland, including the Modest Home Choices Act, which would allow denser housing types in neighborhoods that are either transit adjacent, jobs rich, or in relatively high income. The Social Housing Act would dedicate millions in state funds derived from new real estate transaction fees, and that money would go to finance a government-owned housing that would be constructed with union labor and open to people of all incomes. And finally, the Tenant Protection Act includes a variety of protections to renters. For example, it would make it easier for tenants to terminate leases if their housing conditions are unsafe, or if the tenant is being stalked or harassed by their landlord. It would also give landlords less time to return security deposits, from 45 days to 30 days. And last but not least, Vaughn is a former board member of Action Committee for Transit. And so we welcome both of our speakers. I'm not sure who is one that's coin tossed to go first.
Vaughn, if you don't mind if I jump in first, because I have a timing issue sitting on my.
That would be my strong preference. Go for it.
All right, I'm going to go ahead then and jump ahead, and I'll let Vaughn, Delegate Stewart, chime in when you want to, and do some more at the end. I'm going to share my screen, which I have put together a small presentation. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
All right, great. So the, you know what? If I can get that off the screen, it'll be easier. Okay. So this is just a little presentation, building affordable housing in Montgomery County, or why it's impossible and how to do it. That's my middle child right there. Yeah, it's a fish tank. Can you play that there? All right, great. So anyway, about me, why should you listen to me? And why should you care what I have to say about this? Paul told you a little bit about my background. I'm currently the chair of Rockville Housing Enterprises, which is the public housing authority for the city of Rockville. I also have had an almost 20-year career now in affordable housing community development. And this was a really good excuse to put adorable pictures of my kids in the PowerPoint. Basically, right now I work in housing finance for the federal government. I've worked for HUD. I've done technical assistance across the country for public housing authorities. I've seen a lot of different projects and a lot of different programs trying to build affordable housing, preserve affordable housing for folks across the country. So I hope I have something to offer here. I will say that when it comes to affordable housing, I'm a jack of all trades kind of person with affordable housing. I worked in a lot of different aspects of it. When we get into certain things today, I'm going to hand wave it and we're going to move on. Don't worry about it too much. Some of it's kind of complicated and some of it's not that interesting. But if you have questions, please let me know. We'll go back and touch on anything that anyone finds interesting. Okay, I wanted to start off with talking about the topic. Right now, we're talking a lot about Thrive 2050, which is a general plan. And the general plan mostly addresses attainable housing. or what we started to call attainable housing. It's usually referred to as market affordable housing. If you're interested in that, and you absolutely should be, you should look to the Thrive 2050 discussion. You should look at the various ZTAs, zoning text amendments that have come out from the county council. It is not what we're talking about today. It's a big topic. It's a giant topic. It's not what we're going to go into today. We're going to talk about affordable housing. When I talk about affordable housing, what I usually am talking about and what advocates and people in this area are normally discussing is subsidized housing, which means housing that's subsidized usually through the federal government in some way, shape, or form. Often we talk about affordable housing, what we mean is nobody pays more than 30% of their income. It's usually the voucher limit. All right. And when we talk about affordable housing, there are two big overarching topics that we have to discuss. When we talk about affordable housing, the first one is land. The second one is financing. If we go to the next slide, land is pretty easy. You have to have somewhere to build, or you have to have something to preserve or to rehabilitate. That's the basics of land. Again, see the Thrive 2050 discussion, the various ZTAs. It's not what we're discussing today because it's a bigger topic. It's a specific topic about zoning and land use. What we are going to talk about today, and what I'm trying to try to go and give you a case study to give you a better understanding of how and what it takes to actually build or preserve affordable housing, is we're going to talk about financing. Everyone's favorite, very interesting subject, financing. You have to have money to buy, you have to have money to build, and it has to come from somewhere, right? And that's mostly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to get to it. I'll give you a little foreshadowing. RHE, Rockville Housing Enterprises, it's Public Housing Authority for City of Rockville, has about a $10 million budget, operations budget year over year. Give or take, it's a little less. That's not nearly enough to build anything of comparable size. So when we go find money to try to build or preserve affordable housing, we have to go out and we have to go find money from other people and other places. All right, we can't get it from our operations. We don't have that kind of operations or capital budget. All right, so we're going to talk about financing. We're going to use a case study to talk about financing. That case study mentioned by Paul in the introduction is Fireside Park Apartments in Rockville, not terribly far from the Rockville Metro Station, within walking distance, not terribly far from Newmark Commons on the other side over there. A really nice apartment complex that Rockville Housing Enterprises actually bought and started purchasing and started this road before I joined, and just started construction, closed on construction last year, and is currently in the process of rehabbing all of the units there. So before we talk about Fireside specifically, a little background on Rockville Housing Enterprises. Paul gave a pretty good intro to what Rockville Housing Enterprises does as a public housing authority. But does anybody know what a public housing authority is? Does everybody have a good understanding of what a public housing authority does? The people that have their videos on seem to be giving me quizzical looks. A public housing authority is a unit of local government. It's kind of a special, think of it as a specialized unit of local government. Mark Pishala and the rest of the folks on the Rockville City Council appoint a board that, there's Mark right there, runs and operates Rockville Housing Enterprises. It operates the same way at any public housing authority across the country. Montgomery County has one, it's called HOC, Housing Opportunities Commission. The city of Buffalo has one, the city of Los Angeles has one, everybody has one. One of their primary duties is to administer the voucher program. All right, and you can see up there, housing choice vouchers, we got 400 of those. Fireside, we got 236 units there. As Paul said, we've got 100 public housing units. So we have a public housing property called David Skull, plus some scattered site. We have something called RELP. Don't worry about that too much. Mainstream vouchers, which is vouchers for folks with disabilities. Assorted other things that are about 25. So we've got about 875 total units, vouchers, et cetera, that we administer and operate on behalf of the city of Rockville and for a variety of funding sources, mostly federal. All right. The other things that I put down there at the bottom, we're moving to work agency. We also do project-based Section 8s. We do various support services. We do National Night Out. Don't worry about it. It's a lot. We have a staff of about 14. There's a lot of stuff to do. All right. So we're pretty busy, but one of the thing to realize, to recognize, and to know off of the slide is one of our main purposes is not necessarily to build housing. That's something that we do in addition to the jobs that we already have to do and the things and the projects and programs we already administer. So it's an extra and a top up to things that we do, that we do our best to do when we have the time and when we have the time for it. So if you look through that list of, I don't know, I put 6 or 7 up there. Like I said, you don't see a lot of money for housing construction or housing rehabilitation. All right, we have to go outside for that. We have to go get grant money. We have to go get loans. We have to do that, stuff like that. That's why we talk about external financing. So Fireside Park Apartments. We talk about, the title of this was building affordable housing. Technically, Fireside Park Apartment is a rehab and preservation project. It existed. It was built in the 1960s. We bought it, or RHG bought it in 2012, and we refinanced it and then and are now in the process of rehabbing it. And my child has a stuffed animal. It's an armadillo, in case anybody's wondering. And so we were rehabbing it and refinancing it to maintain its affordability for the next 40 years until we have to do this all over again. All right, 236 unit projects, 22 buildings. It's mixed income, which means that we have both subsidized and non-subsidized units. In practice, our market rate units are subsidized and are maintained at a pretty good level of affordability. We don't charge entirely what the market will bear for those market rate units. So it's 177 affordable, 59 market rate. We have amenities there. There's a playground, there's a pool, there's a lot of green space and picnic area and things like that. It's a nice place. Anybody that tells you they don't want affordable housing because it doesn't look good is wrong. No one can tell the difference. It looks the same. All right, same thing, looks all the same people build it. It's not that big a deal. If you want to go in there and there's not granite on the countertops, don't worry about it, you'll be fine. Mixed finance.
James,
Yes.
sorry, question from
Please.
the chat. Did you buy it at market rate?
We did. I'm going to get to, we bought it. And sorry, I can't see the chat now since I have the screen up. I'm running out of screens. We bought it using right of first refusal. The county came in and used their, exercised their right of first refusal, which means we have to match the offer that was on the table, essentially. So the offer was there for the person that, group that wanted to buy it. We came in and we had the money. So we had to buy it at market rate. And we can't undercut anybody. We have to match the offer that's there. Anyway, so mixed finance. So we bought it in 2012. We knew we were going to have to refinance it. We put it on a loan for 7 years. We went through a refinancing process to allow us to have the construction money to rehab and rebuild it and bring it up to date. Like I said, it was built in the 60s. It needed some updates. So we purchased it then. How did we do the refinance? Very simple, loan guarantees and what's called LIHTC. Don't worry about it. LIHTC is called low income housing tax credit. It will not be on the test. It is a way for affordable housing developers to get equity. And we can talk a little bit more about how LIHTC works in a second, but also loan guarantees. Rockville Housing Enterprises, shockingly, does not have a lot of collateral lying around that we can use to fund loans. A bank is not going to give us a loan for the most part, just off the top. What we and other affordable housing developers do, be they nonprofit or be they public housing authorities, will get loan guarantees from the government. So in our case, we'll talk about it more in a minute, it's PNC Bank. We got the loan from PNC Bank. It's guaranteed by the federal government on the off chance that we default. We won't, but it's there, and that means that they'll loan us the money. And then LIHTC, and we'll talk a little bit more about it more in a minute. So Fireside Park Apartment Complex, if you really want to dig deep into the details, I can give them to you. This is the top-down basic version of how we financed Fireside Park Apartments, how we financed the refinance, the construction loan and rehabilitation of Fireside Park Apartments. Like you can see, there's a permanent loan. It's on a 40-year. Yep, I didn't mean to skip that. $40 million, give or take, 39.9. All right, that was basically refinancing our purchase loan that we had already. Tax credit equity, that's a low income housing tax credit. The way that LIHTC, or low income housing tax credit, works is I can go to the state financing agency as a public housing authority or a nonprofit, or actually any type of bill, and say, I want to build something. I don't have any. Yes, kiddo, you have your stuffy. I don't have enough money to do it. They will give me tax credits. What good are tax credits, do you say? Because you're a nonprofit. You're right, I am a nonprofit and I don't pay taxes. But there are a lot of businesses and people out there that do. I take those tax credits that I get, I sell them, I take that money as equity and I use it to fund affordable housing. I have and am publicly on record stating I'm not a huge fan of the low income housing tax credit system, but as I put on the previous slide, it's the only game in town. So this is what we use. If you want to build affordable housing, you need to get a loan guarantee, go through the loan guarantee program for the federal government and use LIHTC. If you're a nonprofit developer or a public housing authority, that's pretty much how you do it. We got a state loan from the state of Maryland. You can see there for $2 million. We had some reserves and income from a partnership. We can't do this by ourselves. Even with the loan guarantees and the tax credits and everything else, they won't give us any money if we don't have a partner. So we had to go out and get a partner. We got a partner called Hampstead Inc. that has a history and background in development and maintaining properties and stuff like that. They're a good partner. I'm glad they're here with us. They're a part of it. It's not really that important, but we have to have them on the paperwork. Empower Funds is energy money from the state of Maryland. Not a ton, 345. It's not huge, but it is helpful in doing some energy reduction and some additions that we would not have been able to otherwise fund. Loan from the city of Rockville. Thank you, Mark. $500,000. That's in addition to the loan that they gave us originally to purchase. We have a construction loan from Montgomery County. That's 2.8 million. Yeah, sweetheart, can you hang tight 1 second? I'll be right with you, okay? And then we had some public housing funds from the city, from RHE directly that we used. So that's how we funded it. Did we need each and every one of those funding streams? Absolutely. To do what we wanted to do. Yes, sweetheart, it's all done for today, okay? Can you sit down for a minute? I'll help you out with. Okay, you go get it and bring it to daddy, okay? All right. I'm really glad this is the first one we're going to put on the YouTube channel. Okay. So that's how we financed it. We had money from, there are more sources than this. This is the top level. This is most of the money. As you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different funding sources, including ourselves. That's called layered financing. Do you think that all of them have the same reporting and auditing requirements? I absolutely do not. All right. When we talk about administrative burden, and you'll hear that a lot from housing folks who work in affordable housing, this is what I'm talking about. I got 7 different bosses I got to report to. You know what I'm saying? And that's how we can do it. You know, that's how we build affordable housing. Like I said, ours is a rehab. That PNC finance, that permanent loan right there, it's the same funding source. It's called 221D4 that you use to build new affordable housing too. It's the same loan guarantee program. If you saw a project from anybody else, it looked very similar. All right, they might have more funding sources. I'm shocked we didn't have to get more. All right, so Fireside Park Apartments, participating entities. When we closed in June of last year on the Fireside Park refinance and construction loans, there were 31 different people on the phone call for closing a single project, a $60 million project. That is not, when it comes to affordable housing, all that complicated. All right, 31 different people had to sign on something. If you want to know why it took us, we bought this place in 2012. We closed in 2020 on the rehab and construction loan. That's why. All right. If you look down that thing, there's a developer. That's actually us. FPA. That was us the first time. Don't worry about it. It's not important. All right. The Hampstead Group is a managing general partner. How much they manage. PNC Real Estate. All right. That's who get. That's the investor limited partner. That's who got the tax credits. RHE Fireside Park, again, we just run down them. Property management, again, a condition of us getting this loan, we had to have a property manager. Rockville Housing Enterprises is literally a property manager. It's what we do. But to get the money in the general, we had to have the general partner, and they required a property manager. So we have to bring in a property manager. It's currently Edgewood. The construction lender, again, PNC Agency Finance. It's a group within PNC that does this kind of financing. They do this type of deal. Is it a conflict of interest that they're both the tax credit and the lender and the construction lender? Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's fine. Don't worry. Again, the Hampstead Group's co-developer, Nick's Development Co. is our consultant. They're really good at this. They've done it a lot, and we need help sometimes because we don't have that large staff. And then, of course, the legal people who check off on everything. Those are just the top people that were, like I said, 31 people were on the call. We've got to make sure that all coordination takes time and effort, and administration takes time and effort. So in addition to getting the finance, you have to get all these people on board and everyone to pass off. That's in addition to making sure that the city of Rockville has been informed about what they need to do and they approve of what we're doing. Montgomery County, the state of Maryland, all those people have to check off, okay? So when you're trying to build affordable housing, it's not as easy as it looks. It's okay, CJ, it's all right. So that is a real quick run through of how one project that we did, a real quick run through of what it takes to do a very simple project, relatively speaking, in affordable housing. The thing to know is that affordable housing is expensive. All right, we have to go outside for money. We can't do it in-house. It's complex. We have to go and get a lot of different people to sign off. We need money from everywhere. everywhere that we can get it. And every time that you have another funding source, that means you have another person and another partner in the project that you have to make sure that you're informing, make sure that they're approving of things, make sure that you're meeting their standards for affordability and term and all that kind of thing. And then the last thing is it requires patience. It was 9 years from start to finish, and we're still in the middle of construction on Fireside Park. It's due to be done in 2020, beginning of 2023, I think now is when we will finally finish the last rehab and construction on the final building. There's a couple of things in there I didn't tell you about, including a fire at the property. Don't worry about it. Everyone was fine. No one was hurt. It did have an impact on construction time. But it's really hard. It takes a long time. And if you're concerned about affordable housing and you're concerned about people having enough housing and having places to live that they can afford, you've got to try to think of a world in which it doesn't take most of a decade to preserve 236 units of affordable housing, that it doesn't take 7 different funding sources, excuse me, everyone, and that it doesn't take 31 different partners to finalize a deal. And that, like I said, is a very modestly sized affordable housing deal. So I will leave you with this, which is a bunch of useful links for anyone that's really interested in learning more about section 221D4. And if you are going to read that, God help you, it's dense. But there's some other stuff there about the planning and things too, about land use. He's getting a little fussy. I'm going to pause for a minute. I'm going to throw it over to Vaughn. I'll be back in about 90 seconds.
Cool. I'm happy to go unless I don't know what the question order is. Obviously, he's not available to answer questions for the next 90 seconds anyway. So I'm happy to just sort of forge ahead and then defer to y'all with the format afterwards. So again, I'm Vaughn Stewart. I am on the board of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. I used to be on the board of ACT. I'm pretty sure I'm still a dues paying member, but actually it's a good reminder. I need to make sure I'm up on my dues. And I serve Montgomery County. I serve District 19, which is Aspen Hill, parts of basically Silver Spring and Rockville broadly, in the Maryland House of Delegates. And I will state up front, while I have been invited to speak this evening very generously, I know much less about the financing of affordable housing than James. And so I'm going to take a slightly different angle on this, which is that it's really difficult to change the difficult protocol and funding structure that James laid out. In other words, it's difficult to get your elected officials on board with changing the status quo around around affordable housing. And I can speak to that firsthand because I've spent the better part of 3 years as your delegate was, as one of the Montgomery County delegates in Annapolis, trying to change what this looks like and trying to create a funding source for housing construction. And so the reason that James didn't mention much about the state being involved, I guess maybe they gave a $2 million tax credit for that particular project. That's typical. In other words, it's typical for the state not to be super involved because the state has a housing trust fund and it has only spent $50 million from it since 1992. So since I was in preschool, the state has spent a total of $50 million. Now he mentioned obviously that Rockville has a budget of 10 million just in the city of Rockville. So the state of Maryland, obviously, however many times larger than the city of Rockville, spends $50 million over a 30-year span. So we're talking about an infinitesimally small amount of money. And for certain programs, like for example, certain other funds in the state, the amount of funding is capped at comically low amounts, like for example, like $75,000 per project. So the state has made it essentially an intentional choice to not be involved or not to play a huge role in the construction of affordable housing. And that's why James and his colleagues have to rely so heavily on essentially LIHTC funds and the federal government to make this thing happen. Now, that choice has not necessarily been made by every other state. So for example, DC has committed upwards of $100 million to their housing trust fund just in this past year. And that's a jurisdiction that's, 1/12 or whatever the size of Maryland. Now, obviously, it's a partially federal jurisdiction, so it's not a completely one-to-one comparison, but it shows you that Maryland could take a much more of a leading role in this, but it's very difficult. And the reason it's difficult is because it's difficult to raise revenue in Annapolis. A lot of my colleagues are extremely revenue or tax averse. We have failed for years to reinstate, for example, the millionaire's tax or close corporate tax loopholes and a number of other things my colleagues have tried to get done in Annapolis. And this one particular bill that was mentioned by Paul up front that I've been trying to do is called the Social Housing Act. And its sort of legislative history shows you the whack-a-mole frustrations that come about when you try to do something modest like create a dedicated revenue fund, revenue stream for affordable housing on the state level. So it started out actually as a millionaire's tax financing affordable housing construction. I thought, well, that's kind of a, maybe a cool idea. We can just bring back the millionaire's tax. It existed during the O'Malley years. We can fund affordable housing. That proved to be hugely controversial, mostly because people could understand it. Whenever you try to finance a bill through something that's super easy to understand, people make that the entire point of their opposition. So no one was actually talking about social housing or what it meant or why we needed more housing. The entire discussion, my first session when I first introduced this, was about millionaires and why we need to keep them in Maryland and why we can't have them fleeing. So then I thought, okay, well, in 2020, I'll change my tactic a little bit and I'll make it something really boring. So instead of millionaires, we'll increase the real estate transfer tax, which is like a phrase that I think puts a lot of my colleagues to sleep just when I say it, which was the goal. I wanted the focus to be on the housing and not the funding source. But by doing this, I didn't realize that basically every realtor, every builder, and every person involved in this, actually this whole process that James just described, would be extremely up in arms about even a very, very modest increase in the real estate transfer tax, or even one that only applied to, for example, the most expensive homes. And so that session and then this past session has basically just been a frustrating series of me trying to find this revenue or that revenue source and being turned away because a whole nother group of interest groups come out of the woodwork to talk about how the imposition of that funding stream would completely doom them. And so while I've been trying, I will keep trying. I would of course love all of your voices in favor of that, in Annapolis, in favor of that legislation. It is really difficult to even get one more dollar out of the state to assist in the very, very sort of the tricky delegate balance in the game that James is playing. And then I'll make one other point in terms of financing affordable housing in a really broad sense, and that's just a brief plug on modular homes and manufactured homes. So obviously that's not the direction that most of the presentation is in, which we're talking about traditional sort of affordable housing, multifamily projects. But there are a lot of really interesting things happening with modular homes and basically constructing a home off-site and then shipping it to a different area. And when people think about manufactured homes, they oftentimes think about mobile homes, which is not really where the industry is going anymore. We're not talking about trailers in the traditional sense, but unfortunately our laws here in Maryland have not changed with time and are sort of stuck in the 1960s or 1970s conception of what a manufactured home is, which is basically sort of thinking along lines of like a trailer or something that looks like a vehicle rather than something that looks like indistinguishable from a home. And so this, what could be, I think, a relatively transformative or at least a positive step forward in providing more housing, which is trying to get more modular homes in communities across Maryland, has been really hamstrung by state law. So for example, if you try to get a loan to purchase a manufactured home or a modular home, you will usually have to get stuck with a chattel loan, which is akin to an auto loan rather than a traditional mortgage like you're buying a home. And if you get the chattel loan and then try to convert it into a mortgage, it's a really fraught process that you actually cannot do if you're in a manufactured home community. So if you lease your land but own your home, you're going to continue having to pay insane interest rates and all these other things because the law essentially treats your home as a vehicle rather than a home. And so we could talk about that discussion all night. That's obviously a little bit out of left field from the main topic of discussion tonight, but I bring it as an example of how it's really hard to make change in Annapolis on these issues. That's another bill, by the way, just as a brief plug, that I'm going to be working on in the upcoming session. But we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us legislatively to fix the process, or to at least facilitate the process that James works through day in and day out. And so while I think a very natural reaction to James's presentation would be, oh, well, let's just get more funding and let's pass a bunch of laws to make the process easier. That is not exactly as simple as it may sound too, as my experience has proven. So again, if y'all want to get active in this and help me in this fight, I absolutely welcome you at my side. But until then, it's been great to see so many familiar faces tonight. I'm happy to take questions, and I applaud James for doing this work on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure that it's incredibly frustrating, but he's awesome, and I learned a lot tonight.
You should applaud the executive director and our staff. I come in and improve mostly what they do, and then occasionally sign checks. I'm back. Sorry, Sans one co-host, so I'm here for questions. I've tried to answer some in the chat as well, and I think Vaughn covered a great deal of some of the context in which we try to operate. And I think just to add and to reinforce what he said, it's absolutely correct. We can't solve this just with more financing. I think one of the biggest areas of lack of knowledge or misunderstanding in affordable housing, in housing in general, but in affordable housing particularly, is the financing aspect of it. But we absolutely can't avoid the question of things like land use, with the Modest Homes Choices Act directly addresses the land use issue. The social housing directly addresses the financing issue. And of course, there's always the issue of keeping people in their homes and rental assistance. So that's a thing to keep in mind. I focused on financing, I just think, because it's an underappreciated aspect. There is a lot in this policy area. So, Paul?
And I'm just looking in the chat to see if there are questions that.
I tried to go through the chat and answer anything. If I missed, folks, and let me know. And do we want to let people try to unmute and answer? I think that's something we can handle with the numbers that we have, possibly.
Yeah. So James, you may have been trying to skip over this because I asked about LIHTC, and if you could explain some of the hoops involved and how long this takes. And what's involved with that? Because I know you mentioned the 9 years, and it seems like a lot of that is waiting for LIHTC, right?
A lot of that is waiting for LIHTC. It's one of my major issues, personal issues with the program. So as a as a nonprofit developer or somebody trying to develop affordable housing, and as a PHA, I can go to the State Housing Authority and ask for tax credits. There are two different types of tax credits, two different types of low-income housing tax credits, LIHTC. I may not have mentioned the abbreviation, but it's called LIHTC. One's 4%, one's 9%. 9% tax credits are really hard to get and competitive. 4%, pretty much everyone can get it. But I don't really have the capacity, or RHE really doesn't have the capacity to take those tax credits and turn them into money. All right, I don't pay tax. RHE really doesn't pay taxes on our stuff. So the tax credits don't do us any good. So we have to sell them to somebody. And that means we get money, which means we have equity, which means we can do what we need to do. But I don't really have the capacity to sell tax credits at the level that I need to. Plus, no one really wants the amount of tax credits I need for a project. It's kind of helpful. But what you usually do is you go to a syndicator, and a syndicator will roll up your tax credits and other people's tax credits until it's a big enough pot of tax credits that it's a viable thing to sell on the market to somebody that needs them. And when you do that, and so that takes a lot of time. So if I say, hey, I have these tax credits, that's great. I have to wait for enough tax credits to make a viable sort of bond offering. Then it's got to go to the syndicator. The syndicator's got to do it. The syndicator takes their time and takes their cut. The tax credit investor can be active or cannot be active. So you may or may not have to be dealing with them on a regular basis. And then that takes a long time. It's just a coordination issue. It's a costing issue. All of the things that we do in affordable housing that are loan guarantee and tax credit based are economically reactive. So if there's no demand for tax credits, if no one's making any money, well, I'm not going to get as much as I used to for the tax credits, and the equity's not there. Same for the loan guarantee. If the interest rates are high, the interest rates are high. get roughly the same interest rates as anybody else does in the commercial market. So I've got to go to a syndicator. The syndicator's got a bundle, and the syndicator then sells those. They sell tranches, they sell individual ones. Don't worry about it, it's awfully complex. But I don't have any control over that either. I don't have control of the time, and I don't really have control over the cost and bidding process. For the most part, I just kind of got to sit back and wait. And a couple of years ago, there was actually a fairly steep drop in how much we were getting for tax credits. So, you know, often it'll be in the 90, 91, 92 cents on the dollar. It was a lot less for a little while, and there's nothing you can do about that. It'll affect your performance if you need to. But I hope that answers it. You can go into more detail, but it gets awfully complex, awfully fast.
Yeah, James, you talked about these, you know, the administrative burden of putting a project together from start to finish, which is, I guess, related to but separate from the financing difficulties. Are there specific things that could be done to reduce the burden and possibly also at the same time reduce the, you know, the 9 years that you talked about that it took for the project to go,
Yeah.
to come to realization?
There are a couple of things. Thank you, Gray. I don't want to talk about LIHTC anymore either. There are some things you can do for the administrative burden. There's two types of administrative burden. One is the front end, like we're talking about with financing and everything. If I submit something to the state, it really ought to be good enough for the city of Rockville and the county. And for the most part, if there are certain things that you can do to rationalize that, I have to submit to the state of Maryland and the state of Maryland Maryland Energy. Vaughn, help me out. You may remember. It's not the Department of Energy. It's Maryland Energy Administration, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
All right, I'm putting you on the spot. Sorry, don't ignore that question. But if one thing is good enough for one, it ought to be good enough for the other. There's a lot of administrative rationalization that could happen that would make it easier for me to submit it. An audit's an audit. And if it's an audit that's done by a professional firm and adheres to the standards, it ought to be good enough for my pro formas and my financials for pretty much everybody. Everyone has their own reasons for having all the little pieces that they need to report. But quite honestly, it's a massive administrative burden to do all that reporting. And every time, financing can be fluid. And every time that financing changes, interest rates go up, the construction company is different. I got a new partner or whatever. Having to re-report that to everybody can get very technical, very burdensome very quickly. The other thing is on the back end with a LIHTC property, with a tax credit property, I have to annually make sure that the people in my tax credit units are under 60% of area median income of AMI. For this particular property, it's somewhat variant for different properties. Don't worry about the details too much. But I have to do that annually, and I have to re-establish that everybody is under the correct, you know, income bracket. That's very administratively burdensome, and half of the LIHTC units that we have are voucher recipients anyway. So I've got to verify that they're under the voucher amount and that they're under the LIHTC amount, and I have to use two different like systems to do it. If they qualify for a voucher, they're qualified for LIHTC. It's not hard. But that's just, everybody's got their own little reason for that. There's a ton of administrative burden when it comes to that, and it takes up a lot of our time, and it takes up a lot of our property managers' time.
So is there any realistic way for get all these overlapping agencies and entities to talk to each other and try and do some of that streamlining, or is that pie in the sky?
I would think it would be reasonable. HUD for basically every home that's sold has something called a HUD 1 that's universal across the country, and it pretty much contains all the basic information you need to know. Something like that at the state level or different levels would be helpful to sort of minimize the administrative burden. You know, I got to report to the state of Maryland, and like I said, the state of Maryland and the Maryland Energy Agency probably don't need all that many different things from me. But I do have to go and give it to them, give a lot of them the information twice. So, if, a certain Delegate Stewart wanted to introduce a bill and wanted to ask me about it, I'd help. But it's just that the money comes from so many different places. And if the money comes from different places, people want to know where it's going and what you're doing with it. Do not get me started on if you have foundation money. It gets a lot worse, or not a lot worse, but foundations have their own things that they want to do, private foundations. So it's hard when the money comes from so many different places. If I just had to report to PNC Bank, if I only needed 40 million, I'd give them whatever they want, one time, that's fine, do an annual, audit, something like that. But otherwise it starts to creep out. And it's hard to think about how to do it without sort of overhauling the financing system.
Thanks. Let's see. Looks like there's some more questions in the chat. There's, let me see here. Dan Stern asks, does all the financing happen before the community feedback phase of a project, or are they done on parallel tracks?
Usually parallel, depending. So I've been saying, I'm saying 9 years, and it's definitely been a 9-year project, and it's not done yet. There were several years right after we bought the project that we knew we didn't have any money to do anything, and we had to put our refi financing together. So there was a low point, there was a low point there where we just recertifying everyone. And then once it kicks up to the point of actually having to do the financing, we got to go to the city of Rockville and get approval to purchase or refinance, which means we need to actually have some sort of reasonable financial plan in place to do the financing, which means that we got to go and do the public outreach, handle our do our public meetings for certain different types of projects, like this one would require one. On this one, we had to do relocation while we were doing while we're taking apart a building and stripping it down to the concrete, people can't live there while we're doing that. So we have to relocate them, and we have relocation vouchers, which requires us to do a public outreach to the people, the tenants that are there. And so that requires that we do that. So it's all done in tandem, it kind of flows back and forth. And we have to get, preliminary approvals and final approvals and things like that as we go through the process.
Okay. Gray Kimbra asks about recertification of tenants. Do tenants get kicked out if their income rises? Is there a time or income buffer before they need to find new housing?
There's a buffer period. So we'll usually recertify annually. We actually just became a moving to work. Don't worry about it, moving to work PHA, which allows us to recertify less often, but LIHTC, we still have to recertify annually. So there is a buffer time. We don't immediately kick people out if their income rises annually. Plus we can do spot checks and different things. So there's a buffer period. Practically speaking, what we often do is we just say that if someone's income rises enough, particularly in this project, they're now a market rate, unit. Yay! We just charge them the same. So we just call it a market rate unit. We have a certain number that we have to keep market rate. We have a certain number we have to keep. We'll move those around and call them a market rate and call somebody, and then get another, get another income limited or subsidized unit in there. So practically speaking, yeah, there's usually time for people to do it, but they will, if their income rises significantly or a new job, or suddenly somebody's not a teacher anymore, but they're an administrator at a school or something. Yeah, sometimes people have to move, and it's not a lot of fun. It happens more often in these projects and these type of projects than it does happen in pure public housing.
Okay, from Nick Brand, how much of the low-income housing in Montgomery County depends on this mix of private and public financing instead of more government funding?
All of it that I'm aware of. I don't know anybody doing it without mixed public-private. Even for senior housing, which is awfully popular.
It's page 30.
I'll make this quick.
That's my computer.
Okay, talk faster. Section 202 and Section 811, which are senior and disability, respectively, if I'm remembering those right, are similar loan guarantee programs for senior housing and stuff that are awfully popular. Even those usually have to layer funding to build or rehab that kind of housing. So I'm not, HOC may have some money. If we did something like social housing, like with Vaughn's bill, it might be less layered or less mixed financing, or possibly even something like, a banking system where there's a direct loan. But still, almost all of it's going to be layered financing, public-private mix.
Okay, Nancy Jansen asks, how helpful is the Housing Initiative Fund under the Montgomery County Executive and County Council?
Well, useful. But the thing to remember with the county and the city, for all their assistance and all their help, it's an issue of scale. And as much money as the county's got right now for different things, and as much useful as bridge financing is like that, it's hard, and it's not to scale. So, for example, I think the most recent county version or most recent county proposed bill is for $100 million fund. Am I remembering right? Anybody else on $100 million proposed, not currently active? This costs $64 million, to give you an idea of the scale that you're looking at. So useful for bridge financing. Any financing is good financing. Any money that I can get is good. I'll take anything I can get from anywhere. But when it comes to scale, I can't fund it off the housing initiative. I've got to have more money than that. And that's not to say that that's bad. That's to say that just I can't build at scale with that level of funding.
Okay, Byrne Kelly asks, he wants to know, is what you described, is that how other states and municipalities do it? And is there a source for data and research about the different ways that states and localities do their affordable housing programs?
I think Vaughn, sort of mentioned it. Different states do things differently, either through their state housing finance agencies or through the money that they get from the federal government. So a lot of people do it differently. Some have more of a lending, rotating loan fund from the state. That's a nice way that lots of states do it. That you can go and get a loan, and it's kind of just like a bank, a revolving loan fund for housing. Some states have different requirements for their tax credits. They're 9 or 4. Most of them are 9, have different credits. So they'll have different things. They'll emphasize senior housing or disability housing or certain areas of the state, things like that. So there's differences state by state. The specifics will be different. The general idea of having the layer of federal, state, local funds, that's pretty universal.
Yeah, and I'll briefly add that Byrne mentioned Champlain Housing in Vermont, which I'm vaguely familiar with, and I believe is a community land trust. So that's a completely different sort of model of providing affordable housing, a viable one, I think one that's especially gaining popularity in Baltimore City. Yeah. But to answer the question, I mean, and piggybacking off what James said, Vermont has a completely different way of dealing with affordable housing, which is to say they put almost all their eggs in the community land trust basket, which are basically communities where the homeowner sort of has equity in the home itself, but the land is generally owned by a nonprofit that buys the land and then sort of owns it so that it can remain permanently affordable. And so what Vermont has done, which is some states have done this to a lesser degree, but Vermont is kind of the capital of community land trust. They've really kind of reordered all their financing and all their laws in a way to promote community land trusts like Champlain Housing. I would personally like to see Maryland go in that direction. I don't think in any of our lifetimes, except maybe some of the toddlers on the call, maybe will ever sort of reach the pinnacle of Vermont's success with community land trust, but we could certainly do a lot better than what we're doing.
Okay, Ronit has a question. How would zoning changes like Thrive would advocate make it easier for Rockville housing enterprises and others to build affordable housing in the county?
Ronit, did you not see slide 3? Not today. No. To be very, very brief about it, like I said, there are 2 issues in affordable housing, or at least one way to conceptualize of affordable housing is land and financing. You have to have land and you have to have financing. You have to have something to build or something to rehab, and you have to have money to do it. Like Vaughn was discussing, community land trusts really kind of is one way to approach that land issue, to make sure that there's land available to build on and that land is maintained affordable through a mission-oriented organization, nonprofit, public housing authority, what have you. Another way is to attack the zoning issue when it comes right down to it, as for Public Housing Authority, we're an affordable housing developer, a mission-oriented housing developer. All of the issues with exclusionary zoning affect me just as much as they affect any private developer that's out there. And I can't build affordable single-family homes. One, there's no money for it. And two, I just can't do it. It doesn't scale, and it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to buy the land and then build a house and then have one house and then two. I have to sort of, build multifamily to make it pencil out financially. Plus, they won't give me the money. I can't build tract houses. There's no money for it. And so I have to have some place to build or something to buy. And if I have nothing, if no place to build things and nothing to buy, well, that pretty much doesn't matter what financing I've got. And the exclusionary zoning makes it so that I can't build or buy anything in a big chunk of the county. And when I do go buy something, when we talked about right of first refusal, I have to match the offer on the table. The right of first refusal doesn't give me the ability to pay less than what somebody on the private market offered for that particular property or that particular apartment complex. So I've got to match the offer. That cost is also structured by land use and by exclusionary zoning. So changes to land use to make it easier to build multifamily units in more of the county is going to make it a lot easier for me to build, maintain, and buy and preserve affordable housing. Something I didn't really mention here, but is also a thing. We buy MPDUs that are available and then make them affordable. The more things that are built that have the more inclusive zoning, the more I can buy and the more I can maintain affordable forever, essentially. So loosening up those zoning laws and minimizing exclusionary zoning to allow me to allow RHE for us to have the ability to build more, that qualifies to, that applies to both Rockville and for the county in general. It'll make it easier and there's more stuff available for us than to preserve, to buy and to rehab.
Okay, I see there's a question from Nick Brand, which may be a little out of your area, but we'll give it a shot. Do you have an estimate of how many people or what percentage of people are homeless in the county or in the state, due at least in part to the complicated approach that we have for building additional housing? And is there a better way to get these folks into homes? As I said, that sounds to me like a related but separate issue, but I'll see what you folks have to say.
Yeah, I'll make my comment on it real quick. Homelessness is a particularly expert level area of housing, and I haven't done a ton of work in it, but it's very clear from the research as housing prices increase, homelessness increases. If apartments and housing cost more, there's more homeless folks. It's a very simple relationship that's pretty clear, and at least part of that cost and that rising cost is due to land use. I wouldn't put a number on it as a good social scientist, but it is, you don't have to make a very circuitous argument to get there. I don't know if Vaughn, you got anything else to comment on?
I would just add, I agree with all that. I would just add that one of the dumber statistics you may see, especially if you're accustomed or familiar with something called the internet, is people will say, well, they'll count the number of homeless people and they'll count the number of what they call vacant homes. And they'll argue that because the number of vacant homes exceeds the number of homeless people, that proves that we don't need more housing to solve homelessness. This is problematic and honestly dumb for a lot of reasons that would probably take longer than a few seconds to go into. But for one, a lot of these homes, if you're talking about a nationwide or even a statewide level, are in places that are far away from jobs, opportunity, and transit. Number two, a lot of these homes are just like vacation homes that we would have to just somehow seize from people. And as awesome as that sounds, I don't see that happen. We can't even get social housing done. I don't think seizing vacation homes is on the horizon necessarily. And number three, a lot of these vacant homes actually are counting homes that are kind of in the process of being sold, and they're technically vacant because they're kind of being sorted through the real estate transaction process. They're not actually vacant. And then a lot of them are just homes that are not in good enough shape that even if you would have to spend way more money trying to rehabilitate them than the cost of just building new housing. So I agree with all what James says. It's not directly related to Nick's question, but I just wanted to throw that out there because, yeah, if you spend any time on the internet, you are very likely to come across this argument against new housing that somehow we have enough homes. And you'll hear that sometimes from political candidates as well, that we don't need any more housing because homelessness can just be solved through some variety of magic tricks. And that is not the case.
Exactly. Absolutely.
A question that occurs to me listening to the description of the incredible number of hoops that one has to jump through to get an affordable housing project from conception to completion. I guess I'm wondering whether it might be a more feasible approach to the affordable housing problem might just be to just give people money and have them go out and be able to afford the housing that is currently unaffordable, combined with initiatives to increase the supply, which obviously we have to look at demand as well as supply. Anyway, I don't know if people have any thoughts about that, but listening to the discussion of the difficulties in the process, that thought occurred to me.
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what the voucher program is on a small scale. The vouchers are not an entitlement, technically. So we just redid our, we have a backlog of people. We have way more people that need them than we have vouchers that we can give out. And that's just a budget thing. If HUD wants to give me more money, I will absolutely give out more money. And the rule is it's only 30% of your income that you pay, and the rest of it's covered by the voucher. So the voucher can float. But it would have the scale again would have to be. There you go. Thank you, Greg. The scale for the housing choice voucher program would have to be increased significantly to get to that point. And I mean, like I said, we have a waiting list now of several hundred people, and that's down from where we had to purge it for all the people we never were able to give vouchers to over the last several years because we didn't have enough. One of the things I think that it brings to mind is just to remember the issue of scale when we're talking about housing. Everything that we do for housing is not nearly almost even half of enough. So when you're talking about increasing vouchers or having some sort of direct payment system, just recognize the scale involved in that, and also and if you want to get all economic-y on it, whatever inflationary pressure might be there if you don't also have an increased supply while you're at it. You need more homes for those people to do it. We just in Maryland got source of income legislation. And so technically you're not supposed to be able to discriminate against the source of income that you use to pay for your apartment. So it means you can't reject a voucher recipient, but it's only been a year, and you hear a lot about people rejecting voucher recipients. Or if you go on Craigslist, every other apartment listing will say no Section 8. So you have to address that issue as well of enforcement of the source of income, or the requirements that people accept those whatever voucher version that you're doing. Sorry, Vaughn, if you have anything.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was just going to add, I mean, I think that really just sort of the voucher issue really speaks to how interconnected these issues are. And it relates to, I think we're in need also through a question about common myths or whatever. And this isn't so much a myth, is like just piggybacking off what James said about how interconnected the sort of three pillars of housing are, right? In terms of like housing stability, vouchers, housing supply, and then also housing like support in terms of like government funding. And so like, if you just try to go with the voucher program without ever addressing supply, then the cost of the vouchers is just going to go up way past the level that the state would ever actually fund. And then relatedly, people often ask me, as James mentioned in response to a previous question, like, what is the connection between like my social housing stuff and some of the zoning work I've done? And I mean, the simplest explanation to me, and it's basically emphasize what James said, is that you can't really build the social housing stuff that I want to build, not only because we don't have enough money for it and because no one wants to create more money, but because such a small sliver of land, whether you're talking about the county or the state, even allows multifamily housing to exist. Without fixing that, without providing more land that's available for this kind of housing, it's going to way drive up the cost and the financing of what James is describing, because obviously land is a huge part of this. And if only a very small slice of this doesn't ban like apartments, then we're going to be hurting.
Absolutely. Paul, I don't want to interrupt a good discussion and good thing, but what was our original time to go to? Were we 8:30?
Yeah, I think we're running pretty close to the end. You know, if there's a final question from anyone, I'm happy to entertain it. Otherwise, I think we'll wrap things up. Let's see, from Gray, I see from Gray Kimbra, has there been any consideration at the state level of making sure that more land allows affordable apartment buildings? And actually that brings up a good general topic. Land use has traditionally been decided at, at a very local level. And, I know there's a lot of debate now about whether it might be useful to move that up the chain and get the state more involved in making land use decisions. Perhaps that's something that Vaughn can talk about.
Yeah, certainly, Paul, I think that's right on point, that a number of states have basically intervened and said that localities in their states have been handling the housing crisis with too little urgency. And they've been blocking too much housing. And so the state had to step in and essentially be paternalistic to stop them from doing bad things. Maryland has not reached that point. We've been sort of late to the game on the state being involved in housing across the board. And that applies to funding just as it does about land use and zoning decisions, which if you ask most of my colleagues in Annapolis, they would think that God wrote somewhere, I guess, in the Old Testament, that localities have to have the absolute authority to make land use and zoning decisions. And I did put in a bill, the Modest Homes Choice Act, a couple of sessions ago, that would have legalized up to quadplexes in certain census tracts. And that was the first bill that I'm aware of that's ever been introduced in Annapolis, where the state would have had some sort of power in overruling localities' land use decisions. So to answer Gray's question, that is basically the only consideration. The hearing for that bill, you can go back and watch it, was not great. You can tell immediately that a lot of my colleagues of either party are not with me yet on that issue. We have a lot more education to do. But I think ultimately, if we are going to treat this housing crisis as seriously and as it is, and and basically solve the problem with the solution that meets the scale, then I think that's going to involve the state being active and not just allowing counties to block housing over and over and over.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank our panelists for I think an informative and stimulating discussion. And I'd like to thank all the people who participated in the QA for raising important and challenging questions. And thanks to one and all, and I hope to see you all again next month. Thank you.